And then who's gonna? Is it clicked yet?
Tell us what you want to talk to. Tell us you want to deal with it.
Okay, but your computer itself is here.
Somewhere, I don't know. Sit there, turn it on, but you don't tell it this is you have to turn this on. And then it pops up and you have to log in. But it's supposed to. So what am I going to do when I really Okay, folks. Welcome to our new Spiffy lecture hall. We have a little bit more elbow room here, I guess. Not as intimate and cozy. Okay, a couple of general announcements. As noted, there will not be a lecture on Friday. Friday is sort of a follow-up day because I've been told you have a hard week. I don't know. How many people actually plan to show up on Friday afternoon? That's what I thought. Oh. Okay, 1 or 2? 1 o'clock or 2? There's no lecture.
Oh, yeah, the lab.
Lab at 2? Lab at 1?
Oh, wait, one.
Okay, which one? No. Okay, that's easy enough. Okay, so a couple, again, aside from that, today we're actually going back into the section room, if you remember what that's like. And unlike the previous few weeks, when all the structures you were dissecting were somewhere there in the middle, right? There was only one heart and one stomach and one large intestine and one liver and all that stuff. You're back to bilaterally symmetrical stuff. There's a right and there's a left side. So we expect you to dissect both the right and left sides of the face and so forth and so on in the neck. So, there's a little bit of action on both sides. Be careful because it's a fairly small space and scalpels are sharp, but you can do it. Dr. Fernandez, bless his soul, has done two prosections of the upper extremity for you. One of them is just superficially remove the skin so that you can see the major veins and see where they are, the ones he talked about yesterday. The other one is much deeper, and you'll be able to see the major muscle groups that he talked about. So you're sort of responsible for that at a fairly superficial level. And during today's dissection, he will take various of you over to run it through you. Those of you whose tables have been used for these prosections, well, it'll get a bit busy there, but that's the best we can do. Try to ignore it and keep up your dissections. However, the blessing is, for the table that he's done the prosections at, he's also done a prosection of the posterior triangle. So that part of the dissection on at least one half of the body has already been done. So you can sort of see what it looks like. Okay. Obviously, I've got to redo C-Base because there was supposed to be a lecture Friday on the anterior triangle. That's been moved to Monday, and things are being moved along, and so forth. And we'll get around to doing that sometime soon. Okay, so today we're talking about the posterior triangle of the neck. And as you will learn, that wasn't good. Okay, we'll start with the bony structures. So, I don't know if we can turn out the front lights. Can everyone see this? Is it okay? It's sort of faded. That's okay. Okay. So let's just remind ourselves sort of where we are and what kind of features we're dealing with, right? This is the area, sort of the side of the neck here. Okay, so you've got a skull with a zygomatic arch and a nuchal region back there. And what's this thing right here? The mastoid process. Yeah, we'll hear a lot about that today. Down here, there's a clavicle and a sternum. And obviously your 7 cervical vertebrae, the atlas, the axis, and then the last one's got this long spine, so it's called the vertebra prominens. Lying in front of all this, something we'll get to towards the end of the course, you have the hyoid bone under here, sort of floating. It's not actually attached to any other bone. It's sort of attached to the larynx here, the voice box, which has 2 cartilages, the thyroid and the cricoid cartilage. And then these lead directly into the trachea and, of course, into the bronchi and the lungs. Okay, the areas that we're going to be dissecting the next couple of days are a whole series of triangles. So the people who, decide to do terminology and dissecting these parts of the body got sort of carried away with their 9th grade geometry. So everything is a triangle. There's one here in the back called the posterior triangle, which you'll hear a lot more today. Then there's one in front of it, which is referred to as the anterior triangle. That's what we'll talk about and dissect on Monday. And the anterior triangle, in turn, is divided into a whole mess of other little triangles. A muscular triangle, a carotid triangle, a submandibular triangle, and a submental triangle. So these are the ones we're going to be dealing with on Monday. Today we're dealing with this one here in the back, the posterior triangle. And here is the posterior triangle. Area right here. Okay. There are 2 muscles. One of them you're familiar with, the trapezius, which we dissected about the first day, I believe, which attaches onto the back of the cranium here, the lateral part of the clavicle, and then goes down part of the spine of the scapula, and then has all sorts of attachments on to the midline. This one up here is the sternocleidomastoid. So part of it attaches to the sternum, part of it attaches to the clavicle, that's what cleido means, and then part of it goes up to the mastoid. So this is the origin down here attached to the trunk, and this is the insertion up here on the mastoid process. and it's a muscle that if I contract my right sternocleidomastoid, which is going from here to here, my face looks to the other side. The right sternocleidomastoid does that. The left sternocleidomastoid does that. And if you do both sternocleidomastoids, they pull the whole head forward. Okay, so here's the insertion up here on the mastoid process and the superior nuchal line behind it. Like I said, it has a clavicular origin over here on the medial part of the clavicle, and also an origin here on the sternum. And then our friend trapezius from day one. To give you the orientation, a little different view than the one I showed you before. So here's the anterior triangle, which we'll deal with on Monday. So it doesn't look like a triangle here, but we'll make it into a triangle. And then this is the posterior triangle. So bounded by sternocleidomastoid coming down here, trapezius coming down there, and the bottom edge here is formed by the clavicle itself. It's never that simple. Running through the lower area of this posterior triangle is a part of a muscle known as the omohyoid. And the omohyoid, omo refers to shoulder, comes off the scapula back here. Hyoid meaning it goes into that hyoid bone I showed you earlier. So it comes from the shoulder, comes up through here with a posterior belly, has a little looping attachment down here, and then an anterior belly that we'll see on Monday that goes up here into the hyoid bone under the mandible. This omohyoid muscle divides the posterior triangle into two other triangles. Isn't that wonderful? There's the occipital triangle, which is the upper larger portion, and then this smaller little portion down here is called the supraclavicular or omoclavicular or subclavian triangle. So there's triangles all the way down. And there's lots and lots and lots of things we're going to run into. So we're going to first show you some cross sections. So to give you your bearings, here's cervical vertebrae back here. Here's a cross section. Here's the mandible in cross section. There's the tongue, the pharynx back here, the larynx down here, the trachea, behind that the esophagus. Okay, if we look at a cross section through the neck, this is what we're going to see. Here's the anterior part, here's the trachea, here's the esophagus. Wrapping around this area is the thyroid gland, which we'll get to much later in the course. There's this area back here which has all sorts of muscles surrounding the cervical vertebrae. Okay. On either side, there's another sheath here which contains the internal jugular vein, the common carotid artery, and then the vagus nerve traveling with them. Little sympathetic trunk in there. And you'll notice that there's a whole series, these sort of bands here, a whole series of fascial sheaths that separate this area here of muscles around the vertebrae, another fascial sheath wrapping around this area here with the esophagus and the trachea, and then another set of fascial sheaths wrapping around the internal jugular and the carotids, and then another series of fascial sheaths. There's lots and lots of fascial planes that we'll review a little bit later, but today we're going to deal with the ones that we're particularly concerned with. So here's skin out here, and then there's a superficial fascia lying here in the front and the side. And that fascia encloses a muscle called the platysma, which you saw before. When you were pulling off the chest wall way up high, there was this really thin muscle coming down when you skin the chest wall, known as the platysma. And it's a muscle that it covers most of the throat, goes down to the chest. Here it is in sort of side and front view. So it's a huge, fairly thin sheet of muscle. that sort of just covers everything down here like a sheet. It's one of the muscles of facial expression. It enables you to sort of, well, I'll show you. So here's this fellow trying to grimace, not very well. And this is what his platysma looks like. I'm sure you can all do better. If you so do some sort of, yeah, like, that's all platysma. So you see all these bands coming down. You know, plastic surgeons make a lot of money sort of tightening up platysma for people when you get older and it starts dragging. Okay, so that will be overlying everything you do in the neck. You have to realize that. To get all the good structures, the platysma is covering everything. So prepare to sort of peel it out of the way. Okay, so that's the stuff out here. That's platysma, the most superficial structure you're going to run into in the course of your dissection. Here, lying up front, is sternocleidomastoid. Remember we said it was coming from the mastoid process back here behind the ear, going obliquely forward to insert on the medial portion of the clavicle and the sternum. In front of that, there's all these muscles running up, beneath platysma, running up and down the front of your throat, which we will dissect on Monday. Okay, and that's one of the sternocleidomastoid. And here it is. Here's sternocleidomastoid, mastoid process up there, sternum down here, clavicle. So it's the front part of this posterior triangle, right? There's trapezius in the back, so this is the area we're going to deal with for about the next 50 minutes or so. Here's that hyoid muscle up front. This area up here is the anterior triangle, which is Monday's dissection, but just when you're trying to get your bearings on the neck and you've taken the skin off, realize that in front of the sternocleidomastoid is all anterior triangle. Behind it is the posterior triangle. Okay, so way back here is the trapezius. And then deep to that, surrounding these vertebrae, there's a whole series of muscles, some of which you will see in the course of your dissection. We'll go over in more detail. So here's our friend sternocleidomastoid, his trapezius. So this area out here is the posterior triangle. This is the anterior triangle, which we'll worry about on Monday.